What happens when fantasy dreams too big for its time? The 1970s were an era when filmmakers reached for magic and often fell into madness. Worlds of crystal towers, sand demons, and cosmic wanderers were dismissed as flops. But decades later, audiences rediscovered their strange power. These were not failures. They were visions ahead of their age. Welcome to the forgotten realm of 1570s, fantasy bombs that became cult masterpieces. Number 15. Zardoz, 1974. When Zardoz hit theaters, audiences laughed more than they gasped. The sight of Sean Connery in a red loincloth firing a revolver at giant floating stone heads became a symbol of absurdity. Yet beneath its chaos lay a haunting idea: humanity trapped in eternal boredom after achieving immortality. Director John Boorman created the film as a futuristic parable about class decay and the illusion of godlike control. The title creature Zardoz was literally a projection of false divinity made from misread fragments of literature. The movie blurred myth and mockery, blinding its audience with overambitious intellect. Critics tore it apart, labeling it pretentious and incomprehensible. Its surreal visuals confused mainstream viewers, while its existential philosophy angered the studio that demanded a more conventional science fiction adventure. The marketing collapsed, leaving theaters half empty and critics bewildered. But time changed everything. In the age of digital philosophy and post-human debate, Zardoz found its defenders. Film scholars called it prophetic. Art students worshipped its imagery for daring to merge the sacred and the grotesque. What was once ridiculous became revered. Today, Zardoz stands as a hallucinogenic dream of a future humanity too tired to live, yet too advanced to die. A masterpiece born from misunderstanding. Number 14. The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, 1973. At release, this Sinbad sequel felt like a relic of another decade. Sword and sorcery had lost its magic to gritty crime and space epics. But behind its old-fashioned charm was the delicate genius of stop-motion wizard Ray Harryhausen. His creatures moved with an uncanny grace that computer effects still cannot match. The story followed Sinbad as he faced a dark alchemist obsessed with ultimate power. Each monster was sculpted frame by frame from the soul of Harryhausen himself. The bronze statue fight, the winged griffin, the six-armed goddess, they became silent poetry in motion. Critics dismissed the movie as childish and outdated, while studios demanded faster, cheaper effects. Fantasy adventure was dying under the weight of realism. Yet fans who grew up with the film carried it in their hearts. They passed it on through VHS and midnight TV, where it glowed brighter each generation. Today, the Golden Voyage of Sinbad is honored as a craft miracle, a relic of tactile imagination untouched by cynicism. Its magic lives not in perfection, but in persistence, reminding us that true wonder is not meant to please everyone, only those still willing to believe. Number 13. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. When David Bowie descended from the heavens as Thomas Jerome Newton, audiences did not know whether to laugh or mourn. The film was too slow, too strange, too beautiful. It told of an alien who came seeking water for his dying planet, but found only addiction, greed, and loneliness among humans. Director Nicholas Roeg shot the story like a fever dream. Non-linear, fractured, hypnotic. The studio wanted science fiction. The result was existential horror. Bowie's ethereal fragility turned every frame into living art. But producers panicked over the surrealism. They cut scenes and sabotaged distribution, leaving audiences lost in confusion. The film flopped, yet lingered, haunting late-night television like a transmission from another realm. Bowie himself said he never stopped being Newton, trapped between fame and alienation. Decades later, critics hailed it as one of the most visionary works of the decade, a meditation on consumer culture and spiritual decay. The Man Who Fell to Earth no longer felt like science fiction. It felt like prophecy, a story of a being who came to save humanity and instead became its reflection, reminding us that sometimes the strangest failures reveal the truest future. Number 12. Wizards, 1977. Ralph Bakshi's Wizards arrived in theaters at a time when fantasy animation was nearly extinct. Critics did not know what to make of it. Some called it a cartoon for hippies. Others said it was too dark for children. But beneath its chaotic visuals lived a story about magic versus machinery, a tale of two brothers waging war for the soul of the world. The film imagined a post-apocalyptic Earth where ancient magic battled the rebirth of technology. One brother, a wizard of peace; the other, a sorcerer, who discovered old Nazi propaganda films and used them as weapons of fear. The imagery was brutal. The message was clear. The danger of history repeating through manipulation and illusion. Studios hesitated to promote it. Its blend of political satire and psychedelic fantasy confused advertisers. Censors demanded cuts to scenes showing wartime imagery. The release was small, the box office weak, but young audiences discovered it through midnight screenings where it spoke directly to their post-Vietnam disillusionment. Wizards became a cult fire that burned slowly through the decades. Animators called it a miracle of rebellion. Its rough hand-drawn style inspired future visionaries who valued art over polish. Today, Wizard stands as a warning wrapped in color, a reminder that fantasy can sometimes tell the harshest truths about human cruelty and hope. Number 11. The Last Wave, 1977. Peter Weir's The Last Wave was not the fantasy people expected. It was not about magic swords or cosmic creatures. It was about prophecy, about rain. That never stopped. About dreams that crossed from one world into another. At first, audiences were confused. What was this film trying to say about the end of the world hidden beneath the streets of Sydney? The story followed a lawyer who defends Aboriginal men accused of murder, but strange visions haunt him, symbols of storms and stone. As he uncovers the truth, he learns that reality itself is collapsing. The world of myth and law merge. It becomes clear that humanity's arrogance will summon its own destruction. When it premiered, most critics dismissed it as incomprehensible. Viewers walked out unable to explain what they had seen. Even the studio struggled to advertise it, calling it too intellectual for the genre crowd. Yet over time, The Last Wave found its voice among philosophers and dreamers. Its slow dread and mystical imagery inspired filmmakers from Darren Aronofsky to Alex Garland. Now it is considered a spiritual masterpiece, a film that predicted the collapse of certainty in a rational world, a story that whispered of storms not yet seen. Its legacy reminds us that the greatest fantasies are not escapes, but reflections of truths too vast for reason. Number 10. The Dark Crystal, 1982 but conceived in the 70s. Though released in the early 80s, its heart belonged to the 70s. Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal began as a wild experiment, a film with no human actors, only puppets breathing through mechanical souls. Studios thought he had lost his mind. They begged him to add humor to make it lighter. But Henson refused. He wanted to build a living myth. The story told of a dying world ruled by monstrous beings called Skeksis. Their cruelty held the planet in decay until a young gelfling sought to heal the broken crystal. Every creature, every tree, every drop of mist was built by hand through years of obsession. The production nearly destroyed Henson and his team. Endless rewiring of puppets, lighting that melted latex faces, performers fainting under heavy costumes. When it was released, audiences did not understand it. Some children cried. Adults were baffled. Critics called it too dark, too strange. The film failed to meet studio expectations. But over time, The Dark Crystal became a sacred text for fantasy lovers. Its world was pure creation untouched by irony or commerce. Today, it is celebrated as one of cinema's most imaginative worlds, a story that proves magic still exists in craftsmanship. The Dark Crystal endures as an immortal echo of the decade's ambition to dream beyond the human form. Number 9. The Devils, 1971. Ken Russell's The Devils was not just a film. It was an act of war against silence. Based on real 17th century events in France, it told the story of a priest accused of heresy and witchcraft amid mass hysteria and political corruption. From its first frame, the film attacked organized hypocrisy, the marriage of church and state, and the sickness of collective fear. When it premiered, the world recoiled. Governments called it blasphemous. Critics labeled it an abomination. Censors tore through reels, cutting scenes they found too disturbing or sacrilegious. Even the studio that produced it distanced itself after seeing the finished film. In Britain, entire sequences vanished from circulation, including moments that exposed the cruelty of religious authority. Oliver Reed's performance as Father Grandier was volcanic. Vanessa Redgrave's portrayal of Sister Jean mixed devotion with madness, creating imagery that burned into audiences' minds. But it was the tone of the film that terrified studios most. It felt too real, too angry, too close to truths society wanted buried. Russell defended his work as an allegory of power. He said that when governments use faith as a weapon, no one is safe. The studio tried to soften it by trimming violence and hysteria, yet every cut only fueled its legend. The uncut version was banned in multiple countries for decades. When restored, years later, The Devils was hailed as a masterpiece of fearless art. Historians called it the most censored British film in history. Modern audiences saw it differently, not as exploitation, but as revelation. Its warning about fanaticism felt even more urgent. The Devils had risen from its ashes to become proof that the boldest fantasies are often the ones that tell us what we fear about ourselves. Number 8. Phantom of the Paradise, 1974. Before Rocky Horror, there was Phantom of the Paradise, a glam rock opera born from Brian De Palma's feverish imagination. When it opened, it died instantly at the box office. Critics mocked its chaotic energy. Audiences fled in confusion. But beneath its glitter and chaos was a satire so sharp it predicted the corporate control of modern pop culture. The story blended Faust the Phantom of the Opera and Dorian Gray into a neon nightmare. A young composer named Winslow Leach is betrayed by a sinister record producer who steals his music and transforms it into soulless commercial garbage. Horribly disfigured, Winslow hides inside a concert hall, haunting the music industry that destroyed him. De Palma drenched the film in exaggerated style. Split screens, flashing lights, and pounding music from Paul Williams turned it into sensory overload. Studio executives hated it. They demanded cuts, claiming it was too weird, too loud, and impossible to market. The movie vanished after a week, leaving only a few devoted fans who swore it was genius. Those fans kept it alive. Midnight screenings turned into cult rituals. In cities like Winnipeg and Austin, the film ran for years, inspiring generations of musicians and directors. Today, Phantom of the Paradise is seen as prophetic. It predicted fame as addiction, art as commodity, and creativity as something worth dying for. It is no longer a forgotten oddity. It is a monument to artistic rebellion. De Palma's vision remains both tragic and triumphant, a glitter-drenched warning that in the battle between art and industry, the artist often loses, but their ghost never stops singing. Number 7. The Fantastic Planet, 1973. At a glance, The Fantastic Planet looked like a children's animation. Soft colors, slow-pacing, surreal creatures. But inside its calm exterior hid a message of rebellion and resistance that terrified censors around the world. René Laloux's animated masterpiece from France and Czechoslovakia told of humans enslaved by towering blue aliens known as Zardoz, who treated them as pets or pests. The film was a parable about control and freedom, told through dreamlike visuals, unlike anything seen before. Every scene pulsed with symbolism. The Zardoz represented power-obsessed societies. The tiny humans embodied oppressed voices struggling to survive. It was philosophical, daring, yet simple enough for universal understanding. When released, it faced censorship and limited distribution due to its political undertones. Authorities in Eastern Europe considered it subversive. Some Western critics dismissed it as psychedelic nonsense. Studio support was minimal. It seemed destined to fade like a lost hallucination. But something strange happened. Artists, musicians, and thinkers adopted it as an emblem of liberation. Pink Floyd fans screened it at dorm parties. Surrealists called it an animated poem against conformity. Festivals began to celebrate its bold design and haunting score. Over the decades, the Fantastic Planet grew from obscurity to immortality. Its handmade style became the ancestor of countless experimental works. It is now taught in film schools as an example of how art can whisper rebellion even through still frames. The Fantastic Planet reminds us that fantasy can be a weapon against oppression. That imagination is a territory no empire can conquer. In a world addicted to realism, it remains a soft-spoken cry for freedom that still echoes across generations. Number 6. Flesh Gordon, 1974. At first glance, Flesh Gordon seemed like a cheap parody of old pulp adventures, a risque spoof of Flash Gordon made by independent filmmakers with more nerve than money. But behind its bizarre surface was a monumental technical effort that changed underground cinema forever. It was not merely a joke. It was a revolution of miniature effects, stop motion, and satire that rivaled Hollywood. The story followed a brave hero named Flesh, who journeys to the planet Porno to stop Emperor Wang from firing his deadly weapon called the Sex Ray at Earth. While the title sounded crude, the tone was closer to absurdist science fiction theater. It mocked censorship, social panic, and Puritan hypocrisy, all under the disguise of juvenile humor. The production was chaos from day one. The crew worked in abandoned warehouses, constructing intricate sets out of junkyard scraps. Stop-motion artists who later worked on Star Wars cut their teeth here designing miniature, rockets, and alien creatures. Funding ran out constantly. Scenes were shot guerrilla style without permits. When authorities found out about the film's adult tone, they raided the studio and confiscated reels. Despite the chaos, Flesh Gordon was completed through sheer willpower and premiered to shocked audiences. Mainstream critics called it trash, but cult audiences called it visionary. They saw its handmade effects and fearless tone as proof that imagination mattered more than money. Over time, Flesh Gordon earned a legacy as the bridge between pulp parody and sci-fi rebellion. It predicted the satire wave of the late 70s and influenced a generation of special effects artists who loved its DIY courage. Today, it is viewed not as filth, but as fearless comedy. A time capsule of independent creativity that laughed in the face of censorship and proved that passion can outshine perfection. Number 5. The Ninth Configuration, 1979. William Peter Blatty, the writer of The Exorcist, turned to directing for The Ninth Configuration, a film so strange it defied every genre. On paper, it was a psychological war drama. In reality, it was a spiritual fantasy about madness, redemption, and faith disguised as dark comedy. When it premiered, audiences were divided. Some walked out in confusion, others left in tears. The film centered on a secret asylum for American soldiers who had lost their minds during the Vietnam War. Into this crumbling fortress arrives Colonel Kane, a mysterious new commander who claims he can cure them. But as chaos unfolds, it becomes clear that Kane himself is carrying a haunting secret. The studio did not know how to sell it. Was it a war movie, a religious parable, or science fiction about identity? Trailers misled audiences, and the marketing campaign collapsed. Critics mocked it for being too slow and too philosophical. Even the title confused distributors. The film flopped and vanished within weeks. Yet word of mouth grew. Military veterans saw in it the first honest depiction of spiritual trauma. Psychologists praised its portrayal of fractured identity. In the 80s, it resurfaced on cable, where viewers began to call it a lost masterpiece. Today, The Ninth Configuration is revered as a work of haunting beauty. A surreal meditation on good and evil told through the eyes of broken soldiers searching for meaning in an insane world. It has become a sacred relic for those who believe that fantasy and faith can coexist. Blatty's film reminds us that the greatest battles are never fought on the battlefield, but within the soul. Number 4. The Wicker Man, 1973. When The Wicker Man first opened in Britain, it was treated as a disaster. The studio executives hated it. They cut 40 minutes of footage and buried it beneath a double bill to fulfill a contract. Critics barely noticed, audiences ignored it, but beneath the ashes of failure lay one of the most haunting fantasies ever made. The film followed Sergeant Howie, a devout Christian policeman who arrives on a remote Scottish island to search for a missing girl. What he finds is a community that worships pagan gods through music rituals and sacrifice. Every smile hides menace. Every festival chant feels like a warning. Director Robin Hardy and writer Anthony Schaffer built the story as a duel between faith and nature. They meant it as a meditation on control belief and the danger of blind devotion. But the producers saw no commercial value in its folk horror tone. They demanded a shorter cut and ordered it destroyed after release to save on storage costs. For years, only fragments of the original survived. Fans traded bootleg copies like forbidden relics. Then, in the 1980s, a near-complete print resurfaced in America. Critics re-examined it and called it one of the most important British films ever made. Its themes of ritual sacrifice and religious repression struck new chords in a modern audience. The Wicker Man became the definition of a cult classic. Musicians, filmmakers, and horror fans celebrated its eerie folk songs and daylight dread. It transformed from a forgotten thriller into a timeless myth. Today, it stands as proof that true art cannot be buried. It only waits for the right generation to rediscover its fire. Number 3. The Holy Mountain, 1973. There are films that entertain, and there are films that awaken something deeper. Alejandro Jodorowsky's The Holy Mountain belonged to the latter. It was not a movie, but a ritual, a psychedelic odyssey into greed, religion, power, and rebirth that defied logic and terrified studios. When it premiered, audiences did not know what to feel. Some fainted. Others walked out in silence. The film told the story of a nameless thief who meets an alchemist who guides him, and 7 powerful figures on a journey to conquer the Holy Mountain and become gods. Along the way, each character must abandon their illusions, wealth, and false identity. It was a mirror held up to humanity's obsession with control. The production was equally unearthly. Funded by John Lennon and Yoko Ono through Alan Klein, it was shot in Mexico City with hundreds of extras, monks, and real animals. Jodorowsky used real mystical rituals to direct his actors, forcing them to live in isolation and undergo spiritual training. Crew members called it a cinematic cult. When the film was delivered, distributors panicked. They found it unmarketable and blasphemous. It was banned in several countries for its imagery of religious inversion and graphic symbolism. For decades, it was locked away in legal limbo, unseen by the public. But time turned scandal into reverence. The Holy Mountain re-emerged in the 21st century, restored and praised by filmmakers like Nicholas Winding Refn and Gaspar Noé as a sacred text of avant-garde cinema. It became an underground Bible of artistic liberation. Today, it stands as proof that fantasy can be dangerous, holy, and transformative all at once. A vision that did not care to please, only to awaken. Number 2. Fantastic Voyage, 1966. Though released in the late 60s, Fantastic Voyage became a cornerstone for 70s imagination. It inspired an entire decade of mind-bending science and surreal adventures. The film's concept was breathtaking. A team of scientists is miniaturized and injected into a dying man's bloodstream to repair his brain from the inside. It was both medical miracle and visual poetry. By the 70s, its influence grew far beyond its box office run. Artists and filmmakers saw in it the possibility of blending hard science with mystical awe. But when it was reissued and re-edited for international audiences, censors targeted its sequences showing organic detail of the human body. Some countries banned it, claiming it blurred the line between science and sacrilege. Behind the scenes, the production was plagued by technological hurdles. Miniature sets constantly broke down under heat lamps. The camera lenses fogged from condensation inside the simulated bloodstream tunnels. Crew members worked in near darkness to capture the illusion of being microscopic. At one point, filming stopped for 2 weeks when the studio caught fire, destroying entire sets. The initial reception was mixed. Critics loved the visuals but called the story cold. Yet it lingered. Scientists praised its ambition. Educators screened it in classrooms. Its imagery of floating through veins became iconic, inspiring everything from music videos to biology textbooks. By the mid-70s, Fantastic Voyage was reborn as a cult classic, aired on late-night television for audiences hungry for thoughtful adventure. It became a metaphor for humanity exploring not outer space but inner space, a reminder that the universe exists both beyond the stars and within ourselves. Number 1. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. At the top of this list stands a film that dared to turn the apocalypse into absurd comedy. A Boy and His Dog was dismissed as perverse, dark, and incomprehensible when it arrived. Critics called it tasteless. Audiences called it cruel. Yet decades later, it became one of the most influential post-apocalyptic tales ever made. The story followed a young scavenger named Vic and his telepathic dog Blood as they wander through a devastated wasteland, searching for food, shelter, and survival. The film mixed black humor with grim satire, exposing humanity's self-destruction through greed and lust for power. Beneath its bizarre tone was a portrait of moral decay. Director L.Q. Jones adapted the story from Harlan Ellison's novella and shot it in the desolate deserts of Arizona on a shoestring budget. The production was harsh. Cast members fainted from the heat. Equipment broke daily. At one point, coyotes stole the props. The studio lost faith before release. When it finally premiered, many theaters refused to screen it. But word spread fast. College, Students discovered it and called it the first true punk sci-fi film. George Miller cited it as the main inspiration for Mad Max. Its mixture of humor, violence, and existential despair created an entirely new language of dystopian cinema. Years later, Ellison called it both a curse and a triumph. He hated some of the changes, but loved its legacy. A Boy and His Dog became a roadmap for the cynical future, where humanity's survival instinct becomes its downfall. It remains a dark masterpiece wrapped in laughter, a reminder that sometimes the ugliest visions are the ones that tell the most human truths. These were the 1570s fantasy bombs that rose from ashes to immortality. Each was misunderstood in its time only to become legend later. Perhaps failure is not the opposite of greatness, but its beginning. Which of these forgotten fantasies do you think deserves a modern revival? Tell us in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe for more cinematic rediscoveries.